Hey
Hey
Mr.
guys.
Cox and Moti, how are you guys?
Good, thank you.
Doing great.
Thank you as always for bearing with us. Thank you for your patience, and we're of course we're excited. We don't know a whole lot about what you guys would like to talk about as well, so we are equally excited as everybody else to find out more about arbitration and what's been happening behind the scenes. So
Yeah, so as you know, I'm wearing the big hat for arbitration across a whole bunch of topics, and uh, so governance is like voting and block producers and arbitration and the Constitution and everything else. And we realized that arbitration in particular needed a real drill in, and it needed a specialty team and some full-time love and attention. And I was very fortunate to be able to recruit a PhD in mobile electronics and wireless, a guy who started his own business, sold it, and then ran it after selling it. Got entrepreneurial skills. I've seen him on stage. He's just a sharp guy. He's a people person. He understands technology at several levels, and he's a Kenyan national living in the UK. So he's got this wonderful international perspective on things. And he was very excited about the idea of arbitration. I said, Moti, would you please consider taking on being the hub of the arbitration effort? And he said, well, maybe. And we looked into it, and I talked him into it, and he'll have to tell us how things have come, what the status is, and whether he's regretting it or not. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Moti Tabulo.
Thank you, Thomas. I almost feel like I have to look behind me to see if you're actually talking about me there, But yeah, I'm super excited to be involved with EOS. I mean, I've started working with Thomas and the arbitration team and the governance team in general for the last month or so, and talk about jumping in the deep end. It's like I think, as they say, blockchain years are like dog years. I feel like I've been doing it for half a year or longer. Yeah, super excited.
you explained it well there. The dog years analogy. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, definitely.
So true, too.
Yeah. So what have you guys been doing behind the scenes? What should we all know about the arbitration process? What's the latest?
Yeah, so I think what we wanted to talk about today is as we are approaching launch of EOS, there are a lot of questions around how arbitration would look like. So we've prepared a little slide deck, little presentation, just sort of go through some of the main questions the community have had around arbitration. Things like, well, what exactly is arbitration? Who can be an arbitrator? How is arbitration going to be launched? And so just wanted to give everybody sort of an insight into what the governance team is thinking about how arbitration would look like for EOS.
Sure. I think you guys can get started when you'd like. We may have some broadcasting issues, but I will try and correct it as we go along.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Just let me know if I need to repeat anything or yeah, if anything is not clear. Okay. Yeah. So I think, as everyone knows, we're building the governed blockchain, and it's just important to lay out that there are three main principles for that. Three main pillars. One is around the legislation. So really the token holders who would vote periodically on issues, feature upgrades, referendum, etc. Then the second pillar is the executive. So the block producers, people like we had the block producer from Nairobi, Kenya there, Oracle chain as well. And they're really in charge of executing the code, producing blocks, and also carrying out the judicial decisions that are made by the third pillar, the arbitrators. And so the arbitrators really are tasked with resolving disputes and making any special decisions that are needed within the chain and around the chain. Yeah. So I mean, it's important to know that arbitration has existed and been around for millennia. Okay, so we're not with EOS recreating anything new. This is a business framework that's been in place for decades, millennia even. And if you look at some of the history of arbitration, going back to early man, where you'd have a dispute, you'd go to your village elders, and you'd resolve the dispute with the village elders. And then if you look at particularly, for example, in England, where I'm based, arbitration has been taking place in the merchant guilds from the early mid millennia, and so that's really set the framework for arbitration within common law and arbitration systems across the world. So if you look now, I think at the globally, arbitration is accepted in most countries as a form of dispute resolution, and we're really looking at putting that in place for EOS. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen there. Hopefully you can see that.
Actually, it's coming out really well on the screen. So if you want to start your slideshow, you can. But it looks like it
Okay.
actually comes out on the presentation very well.
Okay, so yeah, I'll switch in and out of the screen share just so that you can see my face as well. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, question is why do we want to build? Well, first of all, why do you want arbitration, and why do you want to build our own arbitration? So really with arbitration, we're looking at this as the system for solving issues. So if we have an issue that wasn't caught in the code, so we didn't think about it when we wrote the code, then arbitration helps us to solve that issue. Okay, and it also helps us to ensure that the rules are applied. So if we have all these rules around how different parties within the EOS community can behave, for example, block producers, token holders, account holders, etc., arbitration helps us ensure that everybody within the community really follows those community rules and community norms. And the final thing is it's there to protect everyone, really. So to protect us, we're all working together to bring this to bring EOS.io out, and arbitration is there as a overarching framework to protect us all. And then a question that some people may have is, well, why should we build our own arbitration system? Why don't we just use a pre-existing arbitration system? I mean, there are arbitration forums that exist around the globe. For example, here in London, we have the London Court of International Arbitration, and there's various other arbitration forums, globally, and there are even arbitration forums that focus on specific markets or specific application areas. Now, the key thing is that we're doing arbitration on a blockchain, and I think if you talk to professional arbitrators right now, blockchain brings in a completely different context for them, and there are a lot of issues that are currently unexplored that blockchain brings out. So we're building our own arbitration system. We're putting in place our own arbitration system because of this new context, blockchain. And the other reason we also want to do that is to ensure that with a blockchain, of course, we're operating internationally, we're operating globally, and by putting in place our own arbitration, we're ensuring we have one jurisdiction that everybody understands and everybody knows that this is the common framework. If I have an issue with an account holder or a business that is across the globe from me, then we have this one jurisdiction, this one rule set that we both share, and we both can use to resolve our disputes if it comes to that. I mean, ideally it wouldn't, but that is life, yeah. And if it comes to that, we all have this one context, this one rule set that we can all look at and understand how to resolve the dispute based on that.
Moti, you mentioned if it comes to that, what do you foresee a case coming to arbitration for as opposed to something that may not make it to arbitration? Can you give us a couple examples?
So, I mean, so as an example of something that may not come to arbitration, if you think about, for example, an eBay DApp as an example, where the issue is like I sent something to another person and they didn't receive it. So that kind of issue could potentially be handled within the DApp itself, right? Rather than going to the on-chain arbitration forum. And then essentially anything with arbitration, it's anything where we didn't consider that within the smart contract. So within the smart contract, we've got the code. We also have the intent of what the contract says, and we perhaps have not considered all corner cases in writing that. And arbitration would be there to help resolve those cases.
Interesting. Thank you.
So, well, now that what are we trying to look at? What are we trying to do? What do we need for an EOS-IO arbitration forum? Well, what we've been looking at in the governance team is several things, specifically around arbitration, and the most important thing is firstly the basis for existence. So what is the framework for which arbitration exists within EOS? And the first thing there is incorporating arbitration in the EOS-IO constitution. So Thomas is essentially in charge of that piece of ensuring that the constitution references and it essentially allows for arbitration to take place.
Okay. Moti, I just wanted to mention, if you wanted to leave the screen share on that's fine. Our pictures show right up at the top.
Oh, okay, sure. Okay, that's great. Then I'll just do that then. Yeah, thanks for letting me know. Yeah, I wasn't sure how it worked. Yeah. And so that's let's say the framework is put in the constitution. And then the second thing that we need for arbitration to exist is really the rules for resolving arbitration disputes. And this second bit is what we've within the governance team have been working intensively on over the last month or so, putting in place the rules, looking at what is best practice from other arbitration forums across the world, and also leveraging some of the experience from experienced arbitrators. So we are working very closely with Ian Grigg and EOS Go, who are helping us on that. And yeah, putting that in place within the context of a blockchain. So those are currently being drafted. We are hoping to release that to the community. That's probably next week. We're currently reviewing that within the team. But as soon as that's ready to go, then we'll be releasing it out to the community for their views and their comments, in a similar way that Thomas has done for the Constitution. Okay. So here at the end, hopefully, of this exercise, we'll have the rules for arbitration to take place. And then the second thing that we need is, of course, the people who are going to run arbitration. Okay, so we'll need arbitrators, people to manage cases, people to organize that. We'll also need people who will train potential arbitrators. Okay, and with these two components, then we hope we will have a framework for an EOS-IO arbitration forum. Okay. And so in the next couple of slides, I'll talk a little bit more about how we're going to get the people, how we're going to select arbitrators, etc. So going back, looking at the first thing, the basis for existence. So the governance team will propose a set of arbitration rules and a set of arbitration guidelines. But this is a community project, and that is essentially what the governance team can do: propose a rule set, and then it will be up to the community to debate that and effectively vote on whether they want to accept these arbitration rules. So one way that this may happen is similar to the process that is going to take place with the constitution. They will be at the launch of the EOS.io mainnet be a default constitution, which will reference a default arbitration forum that will have a basic set of arbitration rules and also a proposed set of core arbitrators. And then it will be up to the community to propose either modifications to the arbitration rules or a completely different arbitration rule set or completely different arbitration forum. And then it will be up to token holders to vote on that and decide whether they choose to accept which arbitration forum they choose to accept. And in a similar process to to the constitution, as in a similar process to the constitution, the arbitration forum will be promoted from the default forum to the forum which the community elects to go ahead with. Yeah. Okay, Thomas, did you have anything to add on that voting process?
Yeah, it's right now we're really focused on putting together something that can be distributed with the software, so that if the community chooses to implement out of the box exactly as it shows up in GitHub, it ought to work, and the community is free to replace anything and everything because that's how open source works. And in the case of arbitration, it's really quite elaborate because it's not like a constitution, which I managed to fit the main core constitution on one page. We're talking here about people and training and a handbook, and it's really elaborate and quite daunting. And I'm astonished at how far along the team has gotten so quickly in putting together a really solid offer that I think is quite compelling. And I'm personally hopeful that the token holders will ratify the selections that Moti and the rest of the team have assembled once they've had a chance to see it. But yeah, this is this wonderful, interesting bootstrap process where, block.one is working hard to provide defaults. The community has to self-organize and decide. I'm sure there's going to be some ratification process, and there's always the potential to amend. So even if we think it's great and then it turns out to be less than great, okay, then we'll fix it. And we actually have a path by which the community can fix things. And when I read something like, the Bitcoin wars or, the Ethereum, they have an EIP, which is an Ethereum improvement proposal, number 867 and number 999, where they're just struggling. And I feel so grateful that we've learned so much from other people that we've got a clear process for having a clear process that we can come together and have clear decisions clearly made with rules that can be modified and that have legitimacy because they've been ratified and because we've got a voting and ratification process to begin with. So this is so exciting to be, doing our humble best to create a new thing, knowing that we can't foresee the future and that we can't be perfect because we're just humans, but we have to do our best. And I'm thrilled at the work that Moti and his team have pulled together in such a short time.
Thomas, where can we find more information about this?
I think Moti published on Steemit.
That was on EOS Go. Yeah.
On EOS Go. Fine outlet. Highly recommended.
Good guys are here.
Yes.
They're not bad.
Try.
So I believe there's an arbitration section in the forums, and Moti's got in there the guidelines and principles behind the design, and then a design document, and I think more documents may be coming out shortly.
Yeah.
And pretty strong commitment to transparency. So I think we're going to see the handbook will be published most likely, and I know that the arbitrators, once the forum is up, they kind of need to run their own show. They need to, they can't be controlled by me or him or the token holders. They've got to be self-organizing. And at the same time, they owe a real duty to the chain to be transparent. So it'll be interesting how that unfolds.
How does the community accept this? They just do? They just all agree somehow?
I think that the community is kind of delighted and bemused that we've come so far so quickly, and they're glad to see that it's shaping up. And I think we've gone out of our way to say, okay, now here's where it came from, and here's the source, and here's the UN arbitration, international trade arbitration rule set, and here's the International Center for Dispute Resolution rules, and here's a link to go read it, and here's how we're doing it. And we did 2 online orientations, and then we published the video of the orientation recording. So kind of like everything else we've done on the governance side, we've done our utmost to say, here's what we plan to do. Now here's us doing it. Okay, here's what we just did. Feedback. And I think most people are content to see it unfold in a really orderly, thoughtful way. And while in the Constitution, people are extremely sensitive, like Article 1 is the one that's gotten the most comments on no lying. But arbitration, while it might seem more fiddly, in some ways it's just people get it that arbitration has been done for millennia. It's been done in the current way for decades. There's very little that's novel on a blockchain other than maybe how we give notice. And so I think we've, knock on wood, we've done a decent job of preparing the community and being transparent in operations, so there hasn't been much fear, uncertainty, or doubt. And I think if we continue to do such a good job, and if Moti and his team continue to be transparent and open, as I expect they will, we'll continue to have good buy-in. And I'm hopeful for ratification.
Speaking of uncertainty and doubt, I believe we had a question earlier on from Blocksmith regarding any rules or regulations that govern a arbitrator to make sure that they don't have personal investments or they're not on a payroll of on a payroll of another company.
I know the answer to this one. I'm going to jump in front of Moti and answer this. Just as in not on the blockchain, you also don't want to go into arbitration and find out that your opponent has gotten an arbitrator that's his brother-in-law. It's like, of course not. Of course you want independence, and that's why in the UN rules and in the ICDR rule set, they both say early on, as soon as the appointing authority names a particular arbitrator, both parties can raise objection to the potential for independence, and the individual arbitrator has to be independent and certify that they are. And if it turns out later that they're not only does that undermine the ruling, it also puts them personally in jeopardy. They can be in big trouble if they were to conceal some sort of personal stake they had in the outcome of a ruling. Arbitrators have to be independent, and they have to be seen to be independent. And if you can't do that, you mustn't be an arbitrator.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, there's more.
Yeah, there's more. Wait, there's more. So it's actually speaking to your point there. I mean, how were arbitrators selected, which is, I think, a question that a lot of people have been wondering. There's this component of a key part of the software, and how exactly are people going to be selected? So one thing, as you've asked Bluejays, and as Thomas has said, is a key criteria is you have to be independent, and there has to be no conflict of interest in when an arbitrator is ruling on a case, because as Thomas said, that will completely undermine that ruling later on if somebody were to discover that conflict, and that would be grounds for raising an objection. And then other criteria that we're looking at is aptitude. So arbitration, to be an arbitrator is quite a involved and intense task, and you do need an aptitude for reading, reviewing evidence, reviewing people's claims, and reviewing, understanding the context of their claims, understanding the rules and how they apply to that claim. And yeah, so people need an aptitude to be able to go through that volume of work, and then at the end write a come up with a well-reasoned, well-thought-out, very logical ruling that can stand the test of scrutiny from parties with a vested interest, right? And then the third thing is commitment to both training and service. So with what we're looking at right now is having arbitration open to a wide variety of parties. People, essentially, people can be nominated to be arbitrators, and it's not absolutely a given that you need to be a professional arbitrator. I mean, there will be space for professional arbitrators, but it's not a given that you must be a professional arbitrator. The idea is that the arbitration forum would give training with either arbitration principles with relevant case histories, or blockchain principles if somebody already is familiar with arbitration in the off-chain world. And finally, and something which is quite important and or essentially very important, and Thomas alluded to this a little bit, is that arbitrators will need to rule in their name. Okay, so at the end, once they make a ruling, it would be, I so-and-so rule that this is the result of this dispute, and not everybody is comfortable with that. So so people should be aware that this is the standard of things that will be expected of an arbitrator. Yeah. And the last thing is, I mean, as Thomas has said, the arbitration forum is really going to be a self-governing body. So even though we think these are a good criteria, at the end, the arbitrators in the forum are the ones who will be making that decision, and they will be the ones who will essentially be selecting the people who will meet the criteria, right, to be an arbitrator on EOS.
I'd like to share something on screen as well, if I may.
Sure.
Moti, if you don't mind turning yours off real quick, and I'll find mine. So this is an example of a form of selection report. This isn't the one that would necessarily be used by any particular arbitration forum, but it's the kind of instrument that we often see used for pretty rigorous selection processes. This actually happens to be one that I used to not only use but even sell, although I'm not selling it, so like no conflict here. And what you see here is what the instrument does is it rates the person on 9 behavioral traits, not personality, behavior, in terms of things like pacing. Are they fast moving? How assertive are they? Are they very sociable, reserved or outgoing? And then these colored bars would indicate, the really best people in this role. Let's say it's arbitrators. This is actually on screen. This is analysts, which is slightly different than arbitrators. I think we want to come up with our own model specifically for what a good arbitrator is. And then when the person tests, their initial show up is where they are compared to the bars, and you'll see that this TC person is a little too assertive to be, a little too forceful to be inside the band here, and a little too quick to decide maybe, and the decisiveness, a little too bold.
He's also a party animal, it looks like.
Total party animal, you see. He's way down here in the introvert side, and leans a little intuitive, and we want a little more factual basis. And so that person is an 86% fit, and that would be one of many criteria that you would use. But as you see, the point of sharing this is to say that a good forum can do rigorous selection using a variety of instruments, including very good commercial things like what I just showed you, as well as their own interview criteria, things like domain knowledge, things like geographic location, knowledge of English, since a lot of our decisions will have to be in English because a lot of our governing documents are for the default forum. And so the field is wide open for a very rigorous process to find excellent people, as well as to then give them excellent training and to put them through a process where they it's not as an apprentice, essentially they do all the work of gathering the information and sitting in and reading everything and asking for what they need and writing a decision, which then gets reviewed by somebody else and the other person's name goes on it. And you have to do that multiple times before you're going to be, okay, you've earned your wings, you can fly solo now. And what's been found in other forums is a lot of people can go all that distance and do all the learning. And when it comes to signing their own name, suddenly they get really shy. And it's really hard to put your own name on a decision. And some people wash out at that phase. And if that's what if we have to go through enough people to weed those folks out and let them fail and replace them with other people, that's what we'll do in order to create the kind of forum that gives people a sense of safety and finality and certainty that the governing documents will be applied. They'll be applied fairly. They'll be applied consistently. They'll be applied in a very thoughtful way. And that's what a governed blockchain is that, it's not like, oh, the code is the law. Oh, look, $300 million worth of ethers stuck in a wallet. Oops. Oh, well, the code's the law. We're not going to do that. And yeah, this is a lot of work to create an arbitration forum that's going to be good for the entire blockchain globally. My gosh. But that's what we have to do to take this next step of evolution in blockchain technology to create an environment where people can build small businesses that thrive and they can have some confidence that it's not the code that's the law, it's the law that's the law, and that the intention of the contract will prevail. And that's what we're doing, all the work we have to do to achieve that promise and to give the community the pieces that are needed to fulfill that promise. So I'm tremendously excited by this.
Yeah, so am I. This is amazing. I think that you guys are really bringing that last piece of the puzzle to make this, that, like Thomas said, make it a rule of law blockchain and give that safety and security to people who want to operate on this.
Are there more slides we should see?
There's just the last slide, which is just to give people a sense of how arbitration may work. I think if people have been through arbitration, this is not new for them, but for some of the people who never experienced arbitration, just to give it an insight. So I'll just share that last screen and then. Okay, so a typical process for how arbitration may work is in the first stage, the claimant files a dispute, so alleging or saying that something has untoward has happened. That would go to the EOS-IO arbitration forum, who would then appoint an arbitrator. So the arbitrator that's appointed may, there'll be a variety of different factors around perhaps the application of the business, the kind of business that the claimant is working in. So perhaps in the longer run, we may have arbitrators that specialize in certain dApps. So somebody raises a dispute from a certain dApp business, then that arbitrator would be preferred to rule on that case. Or it could be perhaps a language, or somebody who is particularly from one particular geography, and that's where the claimant and perhaps respondent are coming from. So yeah, different factors would factor into how an arbitrator is appointed. Once the arbitrator is appointed, then the case is reviewed. The arbitrator would hear both parties. We're leaning towards a written process where people would essentially write in their claims, provide the documentary evidence, etc., which the arbitrator would review. They would then go away, think about it. Maybe they need to call expert witnesses in some cases if they don't have that expertise, and then they would evaluate all of that evidence and make a ruling. And once they've made a ruling, then in the interest of transparency, some or all of that ruling would be made available. So at least we would hope at least a summary of the facts, a logic of the rules that were taken into account when coming to a decision, the logic of the decision, and then the resolution of how the case is resolved, and finally signed off by arbitrator so and so. So that at that stage, that's delivered, and then that gets handed off for execution. So in this case, execution would perhaps be a message that's sent to the block producers saying that this is signed by arbitrator so-and-so from the EOS-IO arbitration forum, and this is the remedy that you must apply. And then it would be the block producers who would then go and make sure that they check that, yes, this is a valid arbitrator. It looks like it's a valid ruling because it's in the format of that we expect that it's a ruling comes from, and we would then, as a block producer, apply that ruling. Okay, and then there's the option, well, not the option, but in case, let's say, the claimant or the respondent disagrees with the ruling, they do have the opportunity to to essentially put in another dispute, which would take the form of an appeal. So then they could, if they, for let's say there was something that was let's say a conflict of interest or a gross incompetence on the arbitrator, those could be grounds for an appeal.
Wow.
And yeah, so that's just generally, let's say, an overview of how the process might work. Yeah, and as we'll be giving more details around this and the whole rule set in the coming weeks.
Will there be levels of arbitrators? Talk about different levels of courts. You work your way up the system. Will it be like a higher established arbitrator?
Well, there's the obvious one that the whole blockchain that we're creating is very friendly to nesting. And levels of focus. So a particular DApp is expected to name its own arbitration forum or any contract, anybody who writes a smart contract will say disputes arising in this contract will be heard, over there, and they can name their own dispute forum. And it could be one specific to a domain. It could be one that exists out in the outside world, whatever. If the two people agree, super, you're done. If that falls apart, then it goes out to the outer layer. And again, because things can be nested 3, 4, 5 levels deep, you might find that disputes have to roll outward to whichever level of nesting encompasses all of the pieces. And what you're seeing here is the one that's the entire chain. It catches anything that isn't caught previously. If you'll forgive me, I have a 5:15 stop here on the Pacific time zone. I need to run. But I'm sure Moti can answer any remaining questions. Thank you all for having me on.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you. And Moti, I'm sure so you're in the UK. It must be about 1 a.m. for you.
Yeah, it's a late day.
Okay. Well, we don't want to keep you too much. I mean, your presentation was great, and thank you. And I didn't realize you were so heavily involved with the arbitration process. It's awesome that they brought in some true experts to help us with this, because, I mean, you said it as well. I mean, blockchain, there's so many different disciplines. There's economics and game theory, and of course now we have governance as well. And so it's we're seeing such amazing experts come in and help us out with this. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where we go with it.
Yeah.
Bluejays, what do you? Yeah, I was going to say thanks, Moti, for coming on, and we also appreciate keeping us involved in the posts that you make on the EOS Go forums. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and absolutely appreciate the work you guys are doing. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Moti.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.